Dean Martin walked onto the Tonight Show stage one final time, and what America witnessed that night would haunt Johnny Carson for the rest of his life. Not because of what was said, not because of the laughter or the stories, but because of what Johnny saw in his old friend's eyes. A light that had gone out, a spirit that had been shattered beyond repair. And America was watching it happen in real time. The king of cool, the man who had defined effortless charm for 4 decades, was broken, and there was nothing Johnny Carson or anyone else could do to save him. But here is what nobody expected. The story of Dean Martin's final appearances on The Tonight Show is not what the internet has told you. It is not what the viral videos claim. The truth is far more heartbreaking, far more human, and far more important than any fiction could ever be. What really happened during those final meetings between two of entertainment's greatest legends? Why did Dean Martin, a man who had conquered every stage in America, seem like a ghost of himself? And what did Johnny Carson know that he could never say out loud? Stay with me, because this story will change everything you think you know about fame, friendship, and the price of grief. If this story has already pulled you in, hit that like button right now and tell me in the comments where in the world you are watching from tonight. Because what I am about to reveal is not just Hollywood history. It is a lesson about what it means to lose everything that matters and the silent suffering of men who are supposed to be invincible. The golden years when Dean and Johnny ruled television. To understand the tragedy of Dean Martin's final years, you need to understand what he was before. And you need to understand the friendship he shared with Johnny Carson. A friendship that was built on more than just show business. It was built on mutual respect, genuine affection, and an unspoken understanding that both men knew what it was like to wear a mask for cameras. Dean Martin was everywhere in the 1960s and 70s. He was not just a singer or an actor. He was a cultural phenomenon. His variety show, The Dean Martin Show, ran from 1965 to 1974 and became one of NBC's biggest hits. His persona was perfectly crafted. The lovable drunk who stumbled through songs and made it look easy. The guy who seemed perpetually buzzed but somehow always landed the punchline. The cool cat who made everyone around him look like they were trying too hard. But here is what most people never knew. Dean Martin rarely drank. His daughter Deanna would later reveal that her father's drunk act was exactly that, an act. A carefully constructed character that Dean had borrowed from comedian Joe E. Lewis and perfected into an art form. My father would have a glass of apple juice on stage, she said. Everyone thought it was whiskey. That was the joke. He was always in complete control. Johnny Carson understood this better than anyone. He had watched Dean perform for decades and knew the difference between the character and the man. Dean Martin appeared on The Tonight Show more than 40 times between 1962 and 1980. More than any other major entertainer of his era. These were not just promotional appearances. These were two friends enjoying each other's company, trading stories, making each other laugh. Their on-screen chemistry was electric. Dean would saunter out, sit down with his signature glass, and immediately the banter would start. Sometimes planned, often improvised, always entertaining. Johnny would play the straight man to Dean's laid-back charm, and the audience could feel the genuine affection between them. This was not Hollywood fake. This was real. But everything changed on March 21st, 1987. That was the day Dean Martin's world ended. That was the day his son died. And nothing would ever be the same again. The tragedy that broke the king of cool, Dean Paul Martin Jr., known as Dino to his friends and family, was 35 years old when he died. He was not just Dean Martin's son. He was his pride, his joy, the child he called his golden boy. Dean Paul had made a name for himself separate from his father's shadow. He had been a professional tennis player, competed in the qualifiers at Wimbledon. He had formed a pop group with Desi Arnaz Jr. and Billy Hinch in the 1960s called Dino, Desi, and Billy, and they had actual hits. He had acted in films, earning a Golden Globe nomination for his role in the 1979 film Players. But Dean Paul's true passion was flying. He earned his pilot's license at just 16 years old. In 1980, he joined the California Air National Guard, and by 1981, he was a commissioned officer flying F-4 Phantom II jets. Dean Martin was intensely proud of his son's accomplishments. "I'm proud of him," Dean told People magazine. "I'd be proud even if he didn't become a jet pilot, because he's a good boy." March 21st, 1987 started as a routine training mission. Dean Paul Martin Jr. and his weapons systems officer, Captain Ramon Ortiz, took off from March Air Force Base in California as part of formation of 3 F-4 Phantom jets. They were scheduled to conduct practice bombing runs over the San Bernardino Mountains. The weather was bad. A snowstorm had moved into the area, creating dangerous conditions. Visibility was poor. 9 minutes after takeoff, Dean Paul's aircraft disappeared from radar. Air traffic controllers had tried to warn him about Mount San Gorgonio, the highest peak in Southern California, at over 11,500 feet. They had ordered him to change course. But in the confusion of the storm and the steep climb required to avoid the mountains, something went terribly wrong. Investigators later determined that Dean Paul likely lost spatial orientation, a pilot's nightmare where you cannot tell which way is up or down, especially in clouds. The F-4 Phantom, flying at approximately 560 miles per hour, slammed inverted into a solid granite wall between two mountain peaks at an altitude of only 3,750 feet. Both men died instantly on impact. There was no indication they tried to eject. They never knew what hit them. It took 3 days to locate the crash site. The wreckage was scattered across the desolate mountainside. Dean Martin was at home when he received the news. His manager, Mort Viner, said the family was grief-stricken. But that word does not come close to describing what happened to Dean Martin that day. Something inside him died with his son. Friends who saw Dean in the days and weeks after the crash said he looked like a man whose soul had been ripped out. He barely spoke. He barely ate. The legendary smile was gone. The sparkle in his eyes was extinguished. Dean Martin, the king of cool, the man who had made a career out of never letting anyone see him sweat, was destroyed. The beginning of the end, the failed reunion tour. In 1988, just over a year after Dean Paul's death, Frank Sinatra organized a reunion tour. The Together Again tour would feature the 3 surviving members of the Rat Pack, Sinatra, Dean Martin, and Sammy Davis Jr. It was supposed to be a celebration, a victory lap for 3 legends who had defined Las Vegas and entertainment for a generation. But for Dean, it was a nightmare. His friends hoped that getting back on stage, doing what he loved, might help pull him out of his depression. They were wrong. Dean Martin was going through the motions. He showed up because Frank asked him to, because Sammy needed him, because that is what professionals do. But his heart was not in it. The stadiums were massive, seating tens of thousands of people. Dean had always been a club performer at heart. He thrived on intimate audiences, people close enough to see his eyes, to feel the connection. These enormous venues felt cold and impersonal to him. On one occasion during the tour, Dean turned to Sinatra on stage and muttered loud enough for people nearby to hear, "Frank, what the hell are we doing up here?" Sinatra was furious, but he also understood. He knew Dean was suffering. Everyone knew. After just a few performances, Dean walked off the tour. He told his family he could not do it anymore. He could not pretend to be happy. He could not sing love songs when his heart was shattered. He could not be the Dean Martin everyone expected when Dean Martin no longer existed. Liza Minnelli replaced him for the remainder of the tour. Dean went home, and he barely left again. The man who had been one of the most visible entertainers in America became a recluse. He stopped performing. He stopped recording. He stopped appearing on television. He stopped being Dean Martin. His final public performance was at Bally's Hotel in Las Vegas in 1990. It was a shadow of what he once was. Author William Keck, who was a reporter for the National Enquirer at the time, spent time with Dean during those final years. He was still the nice man that he seemed to be on television, Keck recalled. He would always greet me when I came over to his table. He would always say, "I'll be back on that stage one day. You'll see me." But he was done. Keck described a heartbreaking routine. Dean would eat by himself at the same restaurants, always wearing the same outfit. Navy pants and a light blue shirt. Night after night, alone with his grief. It was like looking at a candle without a flame. Keck said, the light had gone out. The truth about Dean's final Carson appearances. Now, Here is where we need to separate fact from fiction. If you have seen videos online claiming that Dean Martin collapsed on his final interview with Johnny Carson in 1988, you have been misled. That is not what happened. But the truth is somehow even more poignant. Dean Martin's last appearances on The Tonight Show were not in 1988, after his son's death. They were earlier in 1975 and 1980, when Dean was still at the height of his powers, or at least when he was still able to perform the character everyone expected. These appearances have become legendary for different reasons, and understanding them helps us understand what Dean lost. On December 12, 1975, Dean Martin appeared on The Tonight Show alongside Bob Hope in what would become one of the most memorable episodes in the show's history. This was Dean at his most Dean. He walked onto the stage, and from the moment he opened his mouth, it was clear he was playing his drunk character to perfection. He asked Johnny, "How you been, Joey? How'd you get all these people in your room?" The audience roared. Johnny played along, knowing exactly what Dean was doing. For the next hour, Dean was brilliant. He improvised, he cut off cue cards. He kept the audience and even Johnny off balance. It was comedic genius. Bob Hope, one of the greatest entertainers who ever lived, could barely keep up. Ed McMahon and the crew were in tears laughing. This was Dean Martin doing what he did better than anyone, creating spontaneous comedy while making it look effortless. But was he actually drunk? No. His daughter and friends who knew him well confirmed that Dean's drinking was always exaggerated for comedic effect. What people were watching was a master craftsman at work. A man who had spent decades perfecting a character so thoroughly that people could not tell where the act ended and the real person began. Another famous appearance came on February 22, 1980. Dean arrived late, and again, he played up the drunk persona. Florence Henderson was the other guest that night, and Dean's interaction with her became legendary. He was charming, funny, inappropriate in the way only Dean Martin could get away with being. Johnny Carson, always a professional, guided the interview while giving Dean the space to be spontaneous. But here is what is important to understand. Johnny knew. Johnny always knew. He knew Dean was performing. He knew the man sitting across from him was sharp, intelligent, completely in control, and that made their friendship even more special. Dean could be himself with Johnny. He did not have to be on every second. And in those quieter moments between the jokes, when the cameras were off, they were just two friends who understood each other. After 1980, Dean Martin never appeared on The Tonight Show again. Johnny retired in 1992, 3 years before Dean's death. There was no final interview, no dramatic collapse on camera, no tearful confession. But perhaps that makes the real story even sadder, because Dean Martin's final years were not marked by grand public moments. They were marked by silence, by absence, by a man slowly fading from view, carrying grief too heavy for any person to bear. The final years, a king without his crown. In 1993, Dean Martin was diagnosed with lung cancer. He had been a heavy smoker his entire life, and now his body was paying the price. Doctors told him that surgery could prolong his life, possibly give him several more years. Dean refused. He was 76 years old. His son had been dead for 6 years. He was tired. He was ready. "What's the point?" he told his family. He had nothing left to prove, nothing left to give. The stage that had once been his kingdom now felt like a prison. The spotlight that had once energized him now felt like an interrogation light. Dean Martin wanted to go home, and he wanted to rest. He retired from public life entirely in early 1995. His manager, Mort Viner, explained Dean's reasoning. Dean loves to go out to restaurants. What he doesn't like is to be with a lot of people or attend parties. Dean had always been more introverted than people realized. The public persona was an act. The real Dean Martin was quiet, thoughtful, someone who valued genuine connection over crowds and cameras. His final months were spent dining alone, watching television, and occasionally speaking on the phone with old friends. Frank Sinatra tried to reach out, but their relationship had cooled after Dean left the reunion tour. They did eventually reconcile, sharing a dinner a few months before Dean's death. It was said they had a bread roll fight, two old friends acting like kids one last time. But mostly, Dean was alone with his memories and his grief. Christmas morning, 1995. Dean Martin died at his home in Beverly Hills at 3:30 a.m. The official cause of death was acute respiratory failure, resulting from emphysema. He was 78 years old. He died alone, watching television, a glass of red wine beside him. It was quiet. It was private. It was how Dean would have wanted it. When Johnny Carson heard the news, he was devastated. Even though they had not worked together in years, even though their last conversation was long past, Dean's death hit Johnny hard. At Dean's funeral, Johnny was asked to speak. He stood before the gathered mourners. Frank Sinatra, Shirley MacLaine, Bob Newhart, Gregory Peck, and so many others, and he shared what Dean Martin had meant to him. Dean was more than a colleague. Johnny said, his voice thick with emotion. He was more than a friend. He was someone who taught me that you could be genuine in a business built on pretense, that you could be kind in a town that rewards cruelty, that you could keep your dignity even when the world was watching. Johnny paused, gathering himself. When Dean's son died, I watched a light go out in him that never came back on. We all did. And I think that's the most heartbreaking thing I've ever witnessed. Because Dean Martin was a man who spent his entire career making other people happy. But in the end, he couldn't find happiness for himself. He couldn't forgive himself for being unable to save his boy. And that grief consumed him until there was nothing left. The lights on the Las Vegas Strip were dimmed that night in honor of Dean Martin. The king of cool was gone, but his legacy would endure. His music would continue to play. His films would continue to entertain. And the lessons his life taught would continue to resonate. The legacy, what Dean Martin's story teaches us. Dean Martin's story is not just about a talented entertainer who had a successful career. It is about the human cost of grief. It is about what happens when we lose the people we love most. It is about the masks we wear and the pain we hide. And it is about the importance of being there for each other, especially when everything seems fine on the surface. Dean Martin spent his entire career projecting an image of effortless cool. Nothing bothered him. Nothing fazed him. He made it all look easy. But that was the character. The real Dean Martin was a father who loved his children fiercely, a husband who struggled in his relationships, a man who carried insecurities and doubts like everyone else. And when tragedy struck when his son died in that plane crash, the real Dean Martin was exposed. And he could not handle it. There is no shame in that. There is only humanity. Dean did what so many people do when faced with unbearable loss. He retreated. He withdrew. He stopped performing, not just on stage, but in life. He became a ghost of himself because a part of him had died with his son. And no amount of talent, no amount of fame, no amount of success could bring that back. Johnny Carson understood this. Even though they never had that final dramatic interview, even though there was no tearful confession on camera, Johnny knew what Dean was going through. He saw it in his friend's eyes. He heard it in his voice. And he gave Dean what Dean needed most: privacy, respect, the space to grieve without the cameras capturing every moment. In his own final interviews before his death in 2005, Johnny Carson would often reference Dean Martin. He would talk about the importance of genuine friendship in Hollywood, a place where genuine friendship is rare. He would talk about the silent suffering of people who seem to have it all. And he would remind people that you never truly know what someone is going through. Check on your friends. Johnny said in one of his last public statements, the ones who seem fine, the ones who are always smiling, always making jokes. Those are often the ones who are hurting the most. Dean taught me that. He spent his entire career making people laugh. And inside, he was carrying pain we never saw. Until it was too late. The final message, what we can learn today. So what does Dean Martin's story teach us? What can we take from this tragedy? Several things. First, grief is not a sign of weakness. Dean Martin was one of the toughest men in Hollywood. He came from nothing, worked as a boxer and a steel worker before making it as an entertainer. He survived the cutthroat world of show business for over 40 years. But the loss of his son broke him. And that is okay. That is human. Grief does not care how strong you are, how successful you are, how famous you are. It hits everyone the same. Second, The masks we wear are heavy. Dean Martin spent decades playing a character, and it served him well. It made him rich and famous. But it also meant that when he was truly suffering, people did not know how to help him. They had seen him joke his way through everything for so long that they did not realize how much pain he was in. Be careful about the image you project to the world. Make sure the people who love you know the real you, because someday you might need them to see past the mask. Third, we need to be there for each other. Johnny Carson and Dean Martin's friendship was built on mutual respect and genuine affection. They did not need to be in constant contact. They did not need to call each other every day. But when it mattered, they were there. And that is what friendship is. Not grand gestures, not dramatic interventions. Just being present. Just showing up. Just letting someone know they are not alone. If you are watching this video right now, I want you to think about someone in your life. Someone who seems fine. Someone who is always smiling, always joking, always handling everything. And I want you to reach out to them. Not tomorrow, not next week. Today, right now. Send them a message. Call them. Ask them how they are really doing. Not just how are you, but no, really, how are you? Because somewhere right now, someone is going through what Dean Martin went through. They are carrying grief they cannot express. They are wearing a mask they cannot take off. They are pretending to be fine when they're falling apart inside. And your message, your call, your presence might be the only thing that keeps them going. It might be the difference between life and death. Dean Martin's final years were marked by silence and withdrawal. He became a ghost while he was still alive. But his legacy does not have to be one of sadness. It can be one of awareness, one of compassion, one of understanding that even the strongest among us need help sometimes. Even the coolest, most talented, most successful people are human. And humans break. If this story moved you, subscribe to this channel right now. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Someone who might be struggling. Someone who needs to know they are not alone. And most importantly, remember this. Check on your friends. All of them. Even the ones, especially the ones who seem fine. Because Dean Martin seemed fine for years. Until he was not. And by then, it was too late. Do not let that be someone else's story. Do not let that be your story. Reach out. Connect. Be present. You might just save a life. And you will never even know it. Now go do it. Today. Where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments and share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Let's honor Dean Martin's memory by being there for each other, by seeing past the masks, by recognizing that pain can hide behind a smile, and by making sure that no one has to suffer alone. The king of cool is gone, but his lesson lives on. Take care of each other. Check on each other. Love each other. Because in the end, that is all that matters. That is everything.